My guest today is author Scott Walter, and he is going to be discussing with us the dark money network of billionaire bucks financing all of these protests and questionable movements on the left. Scott, how are you today?
Very good. Nice to be with you.
Nice to meet you. You, of course, have written the book Arabella. You are also, tell us a bit about yourself for perhaps people who haven't heard of you before.
Sure. Happy to have written the book Arabella. That's about one of the largest left-wing nonprofit networks. Um, and my day job is president of the Capital Research Center, which for decades has been studying special interests with a particular focus on the nonprofit world, because it's actually so powerfully important in our politics.
Absolutely. And, I think you'd be very interested in speaking with another associate of mine, Charles Ortel. He has been very interested in corruption within the nonprofit world for a long time. And I'm glad that you and I have been put together. I also want to remind Crowdsource the Truth viewers that they can follow the Capital Research Center on X at Capital Research. So tell us a bit about the book, Arabella. I mean, it strikes me immediately. Wasn't there Arabella advisors? Weren't they involved with FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried and all that?
There was there was some connection there. Sam Bankman-Fried's father, who was integrally a part of the network, even though he's a lawyer, and you would have thought he would have been concerned about some of their legal issues, but apparently not. And he was connected to one of Arabella's many fake groups that Arabella concocts and runs. So yes, there is a connection there.
Hmm. So fill us in on the book, and forgive me, you and I were just connected. I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but I am very interested in this dark money network and all of the troubles it's been creating. It seems that all of these protests, we just had this No Kings kind of 2.0 protest, and a lot of people felt that was inauthentic.
Well, the left always wants you to think that everything is purely organic. If two people get together to complain about something in politics, why? It just sprang up organically and nothing more to be seen. And of course, the answer is the left, and I give them some real credit for this. They are superb at organizing these things. It is astounding. They can, in 24 hours, turn out hundreds of protests around the country. And that takes real organizational skills and connections, and you have to have recruited people into your groups and the rest. But that doesn't mean that they are exactly what they seem to be or what the left wants you to think. One of my colleagues was saying just before the No Kings protests this weekend, she said, I noticed that there are three of them close to my house, and you could easily, because of the times and locations, you could easily make all three, right? So, uh, if people are popping from one to another to the next, yeah, that's not exactly purely organic. That's orchestrated and organized.
And I mean, I don't deny what you're saying. It's obviously true, but in addition to that, it just seems like, I went to the No Kings protest here in New York City, and I was walking through the crowd, and I don't know, it was sort of a combination of like a street festival, like people who had nothing to do on a fall afternoon, who just don't like Donald Trump. We didn't see a lot of passion. Normally, these protests are people yelling and very fiery. There also seems to be some connection with the police. It's, as you said, it's very organized, but it's difficult for me to find the words to describe exactly what I'm trying to say. I guess inorganic is just the best description I could give.
Well, I think that's not unreasonable. And the, you know, it's interesting. I don't have an opinion on whether there was less passion this time. There seems to have been less violence than
Right.
many of us understandably feared. Uh, Conceivably, the you saw this with the ugly, Jew-hating protests on college campuses. They diminished over time, and it may be in both cases that part of the trouble is, right, the thing that animates the more radical folks in any of these protests is the notion of victory. We're going to change the world and turn things upside down. Well, when Hamas had first massacred a few thousand people, you could have some hopes of victory and get excited. But as months dragged on, and actually it didn't look like Hamas was going to be able to defeat Israel, a lot of the passion has to get lower because that victory is just harder even for the wild-eyed to believe in. And similarly, in this country, with the domestic political situation, I mean, it sinks in. Donald Trump won the election. He won the popular vote, won both houses of Congress. Um, the notion that we're going to just completely knock all this down, we protesters, has to diminish. And so some of the passion has to start uh, diminishing as well.
It's true. And you mentioned these Hamas, pro Hamas protests. Another thing that I've noticed along the lines of this inorganic nature of some of the protests, the Black Lives Matter movement purports to be primarily concerned with the quality of treatment of Black people in America going back to slavery. And it doesn't seem to be necessarily aligned in any kind of organic way with the Palestinian struggle. I mean, I guess a parallel could be drawn in some way, but I just don't think that if Black people went to Gaza, that they would necessarily be embraced by the people there. What I'm getting at is that it seems to be, whether it's Ukraine, BLM, Gaza, whatever it is that's against Trump, is what these protests are for. It's another element of this inorganic nature that just seems like anybody who hates Trump gets lumped together in one group.
Well, I think your point is correct, but I would just expand it. There was a 60s radical back in the day who made a very honest and revealing statement. The issue is never the issue. The issue is always the revolution. So, meaning we don't care what particular topic is bringing some folks into the street this afternoon. We'll yell and scream about it. We don't actually care that much about it.
You see, that's interesting. And you're bringing up the Students for Democratic, is it Democratic Society or
Yeah, there you
Democratic?
go. That's David.
Yeah.
We don't care about that. We just want to tear down the whole existing society. Or, as our more sophisticated politicos will now say, fundamentally transform America.
Well, and that ties exactly to what.
It absolutely is. And, for Antifa, by the way, everybody should go read Andy Ngo's great book, Unmasked. It's the best book ever written on Antifa. And one of the tidbits in there that I love is there is an entity called Torch Antifa. I think it's torch-antifa.org is this website they even shamelessly have. Um, and Torch Antifa is essentially, you might call it a trait group for Antifa cells in different cities like Portland and elsewhere. And the only person that Andy Ngo is able to discern in public documents is connected to the Torch Antifa website is a 1960s radical. So it's not analogous to the 60s in some cases. It literally is the 60s.
Hmm. It's interesting. I've read that Andy Ngo book, and I agree. It's an excellent book. He does great work. He was really stalked and pursued. It's amazing that there hasn't been more aggressive law enforcement action. I guess some of that is happening now. What can you say about that? What did you think about this hearing that Trump had, sort of an informal hearing? I think Andy Ngo was there talking about declaring Antifa a terrorist organization.
Yes, it was good to see that because, there hasn't been nearly enough attention paid to this. But to me, the two biggest aspects of your the answer to your question are, um, one is there is a difference from the 1960s and now. Not a difference in the people, some of the same people, definitely the same, mental derangements, but uh, the difference is in the 1960s, big city mayors didn't tolerate this, right? Even Democrat mayors
Right.
of big cities were not going to tolerate what Antifa gets away with in the streets of, Chicago or Portland or Seattle or the rest. So that is a big and terrible difference. And that leads to the second thing important to think about in this context. Um, I don't especially want the feds mixed up in fighting Antifa and the rest, other than in a minimal way, right? Like ideally, the FBI would be supplying intelligence on these groups because it has powerful, obviously the Portland police are not going to have the same capacity as the FBI to track some of this stuff. Like, what if they're getting foreign money? What if they're tied to this, that, or the other groups in these very surreptitious ways? The FBI doing some intel work like that for state and local police is the ideal for two reasons. One is that first of all, the feds don't have the capacity, right? I think somebody was telling me that the New York City police force is double the number of agents that the FBI has, right?
Yeah.
Whatever the precise numbers, the feds don't have enough people to be policing all our major cities for violent protests. And then second, of course, the crime is mostly a state and local matter. Even now, there are certainly federal crimes, and the feds get involved in them from time to time. But, most of the ugliness that's going on is violations of state and local laws, and they should be enforcing their laws. And if the feds can be some help with intel, great, but the feds are not designed to do this sort of thing. And I prefer states, and you want to talk about authoritarianism? Okay, well then get Portland and Seattle to actually enforce their laws so that the feds are not dragged into this.
You've raised an incredibly intriguing point here, Scott. The issue that I see, however, is, and let's go to Portland. This is very relevant to a lot of the work that I've done. This is an article from the local ABC affiliate in Portland going back to 2011, when the government, the FBI specifically, we see in the background FBI General Counsel at the time, Valerie Caproni. Today, she is a U.S. District Court judge here in the Southern District of New York. Caproni went to Portland to plead with the city council to get the local police to rejoin the FBI JTTF. I don't know if you're aware of the Joint Terrorism
Sure.
Task Force. I mean, it's one of these things that on the surface sounds really great, but like so many of these left-wing nonprofit organizations, they name it like the Institute for Peace or whatever, and we find out later that it's actually fomenting war all over the place. A lot of people believe that the FBI JTTF is a rather corrupted thing that has allowed the FBI to essentially turn local law enforcement networks into something of a federal law enforcement internet, where they have nodes in each of these police departments. And as you said, it's a sophisticated difference today versus the Weather Underground, where these operatives, in some cases now, are elected city officials. We saw the district attorney of San Francisco was Chesa Boudin, literally the son of Weather Underground operatives. So my fear is
Raised
that,
while they were in prison, raised by other Weather Underground operatives.
and then
Yes.
recently commuted or pardoned or whatever it is. So my concern is that our government has become infiltrated up to the FBI, the Southern District of New York Federal District Court. It's a pretty dangerous situation. I don't mean to put you on the spot. And again, you and I, we've just met today, so I'm not fully familiar with all of your work. But I just wonder if the Capital Research Center has looked into any of this type of infiltration.
Well, our most recent report out just a week ago, roughly, is called Infiltrated, and it's about the homelessness industrial complex.
Ooh.
Uh, a wonderful term coined, I believe, by my friend Christopher Rufo, who was kind
Oh,
enough to
yeah.
do a wonderful introduction to that report. But the essential thing there is how radicals have manipulated the whole homelessness uh, assistance sector. And in the most extreme cases, not all, but in most extreme cases, really nasty radical groups that exalt violence um, are even tied into this because, of course, they love the homeless as political props, right? They are going to point to the homeless on your streets and say they're there because of capitalism or America's systemic racism or whatever idiocy they've got today. And the fact the guy's on fentanyl and schizophrenic has nothing to do with it.
Well, I think we also saw an acceleration of that. It's intriguing. I'm glad that you and I have met, and I hope we'll have many conversations after this because I think there's a lot that we could discuss. I think we've seen a sort of acceleration of what you're describing with the migrant crisis in New York City, because essentially those were candidates for this same kind of homelessness crisis where lots of NGO money could be funneled to different groups. But it also created an incredible pool of constituents who are criminals who could do all kinds of things. I find a lot of these groups like to act through surrogates so that they're not actually doing these things themselves. They get other people to do their dirty work for them. So if anything goes sideways, they can just say, oh, we don't know those people, they're criminals.
Uh, no, you're right that it's a complicated and very savvy process that's used. Let me shout out another good report. The Center for Security Policy has a report on Utah and its wacky folks like this. And I like that report because they focus just on that one state. And you wouldn't, of all the states, you wouldn't think Utah would have uh, this issue, but sadly, the same kind of crazies are even in Utah. And the value of the report is it shows you how, particular activists, they may be a member of an above ground group, right, that isn't that extreme in what it says publicly. In fact, most of its members probably don't even want to be violent and the rest, but uh, a few of the members of that above ground group are secretly part of underground groups that are quite violent, right? And you have these, that requires real investigation and real undercover work. And a great journalist like Andy Ngo is able to do some of that, but the law enforcement authorities need to be doing that sort of thing as well.
Hmm. You talk about Utah. I think we can't help but think about the recent tragedy with the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Does that tie in? Would you say, obviously, the guy that they've got in jail, they're saying was radicalized online. He's allegedly involved with a furry transgender, and there's always some kind of new subset that seems to be coming up. Any thoughts on that?
I think that's probably why the Center for Security Policy. Well, I no, it isn't because I take that back. They had been studying Utah um, for a while, but obviously the Charlie Kirk's murder there, assassination, spurred them, I think, to actually make this public because they've been doing. You have to follow these things for a while, and it's not easy to burrow in and then report on them. But so far, I'm not aware of any evidence that the assassin was officially a member, right, of any group. And of course, our wonderful mainstream media is emphatic about that. There's no evidence he was part. Okay, yeah, there's not, at least for now. But as you say, uh, his radicalization didn't, it's not that he sat in his room and thought this through without the aid of the larger left-wing world. So, you know, there may not be a group that has a legal responsibility for assisting him, right? That you could prove in a court of law. but there definitely is a moral responsibility for lots of groups that exalt violence, that justify violence, that even train people in violence.
Yeah, and I think we've heard there are some pretty radical, violent transgender groups in Utah. The name escapes me right now. I certainly don't speak for you, Scott. I just want to be careful to make sure that I'm not even
Sure.
convinced that Tyler Robinson is guilty. And of course, until they make that determination in court, we've got to presume he's innocent. There's so much contradictory evidence in that Charlie Kirk case, it's difficult to say. But just to take you back to this whole FBI and infiltration and all that, going back to the prosecution of the Weather Underground, obviously I wasn't alive, or I was very, very young when the prosecutions came about. But Bill Ayers famously marched out of the courtroom, I believe here in the Southern District of New York, saying that he was guilty as sin, but free as a bird. And if my understanding is correct, it had to do with the way the FBI had recorded certain phone calls from him. So it's just strange to me that it seems like the FBI has all this latitude where they can spy on people and do illegal wiretaps, and when the result of those illegal spying operations benefit them, they can do things like investigate Donald Trump and alleged ties to Russia and hacking and all kinds of things that seem to be unsupported by evidence. And on the flip side, when it suits them, they can reveal that they've illegally penetrated people's Fourth Amendment rights and investigated them in ways that could eliminate all the evidence from a particular case. Do you know if there is any evidence that the FBI actually was working with or assisting the Weather Underground, and that might continue today?
I don't know of any evidence saying that, but I will let me give you another website. I'm very proud of our influencewatch.org website, and you can get wonderful deep dive histories of the Weather Underground. Another critical group in this area, the National Lawyers Guild. The National Lawyers Guild is effectively the legal branch of Antifa. They show up at and by the way, back in Stalin's day, they were a Stalinist front group, but for the Soviets. And they are at all those protests in bright fluorescent green hats, and they have multiple purposes. One thing is the cops, they're always watching the cops, so the cops know these guys might be, witnesses against them. They are also there to reassure the protesters that, hey, we're going to try to keep you from getting arrested. And if you get arrested, we're going to spring you from jail. And if, sadly, it's not that likely, but if you actually went to trial, we're going to represent you at trial. So it's all these ways that the National Lawyers Guild is effectively encouraging law breaking, because they're there to defend folks from the law at every stage of the process.
It's really unbelievable. I agree that National Lawyers Guild is quite problematic, to say the least. And, again, what you're mentioning about law enforcement, and I've been very, very suspicious of law enforcement's involvement in some of these protests. When I say involvement, there was just back to Hamas for a moment. I live just a few blocks away. You were talking about the hateful, bigoted protests on college campuses. I live literally just 2 blocks away from the Fashion Institute of Technology. Not a famous college necessarily, but it's a college here in New York City. And I was accosted by this guy right here. I was just walking home. I wasn't even doing one of my normal live streams, but I happened upon this crowd right outside FIT here. And let's just advance to where they were. You could see the police lights and everything up there. These people were going absolutely crazy. And I noticed this one character who had a keffiyeh, not this guy. This was a pudgy white kid who was, video recording me just because I showed up video recording. Of course, he's got his face covered in a very cowardly fashion, demanded to know who I was, but wouldn't reveal who he was. A lot of people were surrounding me. The police were behind this fence here. and they were just getting pretty rowdy. I noticed, I'm just trying to advance in the video so you can see him, Free Palestine, all these fat white people who likely would be killed by the Islamists who occupy Gaza. I noticed this one guy walking around. These guys were getting in my face. I noticed this one guy walking around who was very carefully covering his face with the keffiyeh, and he started to threaten. There he is, this guy. He's giving me the finger. He's trying to poke me in the eye with this Palestinian flag. I had a pretty powerful zoom lens on this camera, and I did eventually capture an image of his face. And the image of his face appears right here in the image on the right. This is the guy who was just trying to poke me in the eye with the Palestine flag right outside FIT. And the next day, I saw this, which was his mugshot in the New York Post, describing that this guy was a gang member named Victor Parra. Victor Parra was a Venezuelan gang member who had been arrested for some sort of migrant. He's the ringleader, according to the New York Post, of a moped crime gang, this guy Victor Parra. And when I presented his picture to a police lieutenant the next day from the protest, the police lieutenant said, yeah, that's a remarkable resemblance. And he demanded my ID and information. So, I mean, again, you might think I'm inferring too much, but I see the NYPD working with these protesters, creating these protests, and I'm quite confused by that.
Well, as I said, I don't have any good inside information on that. I think I will say, just as a generalization, that in a lot of these cities, I'm not so sure that it's the police that deserve most of the blame. It would seem to be that the mayors and city councils are the ones restraining the police from maintaining the rule of law, right? Which is just so shameful. I mean, Andy No's book talks about in the times he's getting beaten up and the horrible protests and the rest, that the city council and the mayor both said, okay, we're not going to allow any use of tear gas. It's like you have riots literally daily, but can't use any tear gas to stop riots with property destruction and harm to people like Andy.
Oh yeah, I mean, you're going to get no disagreement from me that the mayor, certainly of New York City, Eric Adams, is a huge part of the problem. But of course, if he orders the police to stand down, if he says, oh yeah, we're going to give a permit to this thing that will shut down businesses in New York City, we're going to allow unqualified old ladies to direct traffic, shut down Midtown, etc. Obviously, it's the mayor, whoever. And now we've got Zoran Mamdani, who's obviously favored to become the mayor of New York City. I would think that's just a further infiltration by these dark money groups. Zoran has been marketed to us just like Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola is not popular because it's good for you, or it's going to have some kind of benefit to your teeth or your health. Somebody spent a lot of money putting it on television, making people think it's delicious, filled it up with junk, and now everybody drinks it. I see Zoran Mamdani in a similar kind of way.
Well, I work at a 501c3 that criticizes C3s for getting too involved in politics. So I'll wait for my comments on Mr. Mamdani after the election is held.
I appreciate that. That's very nice of you to say. Actually, you're one of the first people associated with a 501c3 that I've ever spoken with who actually respects that. And it brings me to another non-political question about NGOs. There's a character by the name of Norm Eisen, who I'm sure you've heard of, and he seems to have really perfected this tactic. I don't know if he invented it, but he's very involved in creating entities that are linked to both a 501c3 and a 501c4. And then they'll do all kinds of political activity through the C4, like bringing lawsuits against Donald Trump and his associates, while sharing expenses, office spaces, board directors with the C3 so that their donors, who are often these same multimillionaire and billionaire characters that your book talks about, they're the ones providing the funding. And this is sort of hardly even a loophole. I mean, it seems like a very barely transparent effort to hide where the money is coming from. Have you looked into that at all?
Oh, yes. And the matching pair of C3, C4s is extremely common, especially on the left, and Arabella specializes in it. If you were a billionaire and you walked through their doors this morning, they could set up a C3 and a C4 instantly because they would just be your new entities would be what's called fiscally sponsored projects of one of their C3s and one of their C4s. So you wouldn't have to incorporate, you wouldn't have to make IRS filings, you wouldn't have to reveal your finances. You'd just be subsumed along with dozens, even hundreds of others under these big umbrella nonprofits that Arabella operates. So you could have your matching pair of C3 and C4, instantly, no pain, no IRS. You have to wait for the IRS to recognize you, anything else.
It's amazing. It's almost like a turnkey fraud built to order. How can that be legal?
I can tell you that there are folks in Congress on some of the appropriate committees who are trying to look at fiscal sponsorship reforms. The original idea was, to incubate, right? Like you're a big soup kitchen and somebody wants to start a soup kitchen in the adjoining town, and they're essentially just going to borrow your tax status, for 6 months, a year, while they get themselves up and running and they apply to the IRS to be recognized and wait the months that it takes and all that. And then they spin off in their own independent thing. Well, that's not, nobody would object to that. But that's not why Arabella does it.
No, definitely not. And I find that this is a vast network. People who are watching this and maybe don't know about your work or haven't heard about this before, in my view, from what I've seen, this is not just limited to Arabella. There's a large number of groups that do this. In fact, Joe Biden's former Disinformation Governance Board director, this woman named Nina Jankowicz, is openly soliciting people to give money to a 501c3, and she describes exactly what you just said, that her American Sunlight Project is a 501c3 project, or whatever the language you just used there. It was exactly how she described it. And she's soliciting funds. On the board, we have all these left-wing rogues, including the founder and former director of the Lawfare Institute, Benjamin Wittes. So this is literally lawfare that these people are using. I think the term is kind of maybe misunderstood by a lot of people, to think that it's just a Fox News talking point or a Donald Trump buzzword or something like that. But they are literally doing exactly what you've just described. They analyze these laws and they say, oh, well, there's nothing that says we can't do this 501c3, 501c4 thing and use it to fund protests. Or they're really pushing the envelope of what could possibly be legal, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And by the way, George Soros you probably heard of his Democracy Alliance. It's been around for a couple of decades. He and Peter Lewis of Progressive Insurance founded it in '05, right after they both had put a ton of money into the Democratic Party to stop the greatest tyrant the world had ever seen, George W. Bush. And so they were angry that they didn't get anything for their tens of millions of dollars to the party, and they decided that they were going to set this gathering up. Still meets twice a year, has around 100 members, centimillionaires, billionaires, and they make investments in the nonprofit world. But for the same reason that those two founders had been making investments in 2004 to win elections, to change laws, and the like. And they use Arabella, the Democracy Alliance uses Arabella to pool donors' money, and they do it in matched pairs of C3s, C4s.
Yeah, I think you're jogging my memory in that I do believe there was a Democracy Alliance meeting that a reporter for the Daily Caller happened to be at some hotel where it was happening. It doesn't look like it's going to let me look at this without signing in. But there was, as I recall, I hope I'm remembering this correctly, there was a meeting at a hotel, and this reporter found a crumpled up document in the trash, which was an agenda or something like that. And it
Oh
was
yeah.
basically, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, if you go to influencewatch.org and look up Democracy Alliance, pretty sure that we have uploaded copies of some of these documents that leak out over time from the Democracy Alliance meetings. But in one of those documents, one of the things that I loved is that uh, there's a diagram on there, and it has two groups of things, and then there's a big dark line in between them to represent a legal firewall. Because, in politics, certain groups are not allowed to be connected to other groups, right?
Right.
Legally. And the this graphic shows some of those groups that are supposed to have that big firewall in between them. But it's a funny thing. The diagram also shows two sets of dotted lines that violate that firewall. And one of those lines is labeled donors, because of course donors can deal with both of them and give money to both of them. And the other dotted line is something like data warehouse. And of course, what they mean there is Catalyst, that's spelled List, Catalyst, which is a company set up by, it's founded by two or three folks. One of the founders was the head of the AFL-CIO's political division. Another founder, Harold Ickes, was a top Clinton White House aide,
Oh,
and they set
yes.
that up as a yes, there you go, as a data warehouse,
Oh,
because of course the data warehouse can be hired by groups on both sides of the legal line, but of course that it's not forbidden to directly forbidden to share information with the two sides. So.
yeah.
That was my personal favorite of all the stuff in the Democracy Alliance agendas and meeting documents.
See, what you're describing is an extremely dangerous combination of lawyers, technologists, and political activists or operatives who are able to kind of dance in between the raindrops, if you will, move in the cracks, and figure out how to find these loopholes. And I think the problem is they've been doing this literally for decades, certainly 3, 4 decades, since computers and technology have begun to infiltrate society, the 90s and certainly the 2000s to today. It's easy for people who are maybe a little bit older and grew up when this technology wasn't around to kind of view that as not that much time, whereas people who are younger and have always had it just feel like it's always been here. But it really seems like they've utilized technology to create a lot of these problems. Do you think that's correct?
Well, how do we begin this whole conversation, right? These folks are extremely well organized, very savvy. And so it makes sense. This is their religion, right? Sadly, these people have politics for their religion, and they bring to it a fundamentalist fervor. And so, yes, they exploit every technology, every legal loophole. Sometimes they just ignore the laws because, hey, in the nonprofit world, there's not much enforcement of the laws. So they are always about, they lust for power above all, and they find endless new strategies for getting at that power.
And I think one of the technological tools that was critical in this was Twitter. People have heard about the Twitter files and Elon Musk buying Twitter, etc. I don't know if you were aware of this detail, and it does go to perhaps a nonprofit that will surprise you. People who've been watching Crowdsource the Truth know that I've been talking about this forever. But an important executive at Twitter named Adam Sharp is now the president of the 501c6 nonprofit, the National Academy of Television Arts and Sciences. He took over the role for someone who is now at the Aspen Institute, this woman, Vivian Schiller. She was one of the people who headed up this desktop digital exercise that was sort of teaching journalists how to deal with the, at that point, October 14th, hypothetical release of information about a laptop attributed to Hunter Biden. And it was certainly prescient because that happened, I think, within days or weeks of this. And then, of course, Adam Sharp appeared on the news, even though he was no longer working for Twitter for about 4 years at this point. Adam Sharp appeared on CNBC to explain how content moderation on Twitter was so important and convincing everyone that this laptop was, Russian disinformation that we all needed to be protected from. Exactly coincident with then Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey testifying in front of the Senate, getting yelled at by Ted Cruz. Now, I'm not really a big Ted Cruz fan, but I just can't help but notice the coincidental nature of these things. Is this anything that you've looked at?
Well, we definitely have a lot on the nasty un-American censorship campaigns that were waged by the left, by the last administration, by the big social media platforms. It's certainly one of the most shameful incidents in American history, but I understand it. Now, I don't approve, but I understand. All those social media companies in 2016, the morning after Trump's election, they were sobbing, right? We all saw those videos. They're sobbing and they're blaming themselves. Like, this is our fault that Donald Trump got elected. And, I think they're probably right about that because they were letting Americans talk to one another without gatekeepers, without censorship. This is not, when I grew up, there was, a few national newspapers and 3 television networks, and they were the gatekeepers for everything. Um, with the rise of social media, you could talk to your family and friends directly. And so, this is the thing. America is not a left-wing country. America is very much a center-right country. Probably 3/4 of Americans agree with at least 3/4 of what you and I think. And that's a terrible disadvantage for the left. They have to, that's the democratic truth, right? And they have to suppress democracy. And the censorship regimes that got installed were precisely designed to do that suppression of democracy so people wouldn't be communicating with each other honestly and easily because conservatives' arguments are better, and most people are at least vaguely conservative. So things like that become necessary.
Absolutely. And I think it's dangerous for people to presume that these efforts have been defeated just because something like the Disinformation Governance Board was shut down or Donald Trump won the election in 2024. These are very determined groups that aren't giving up. I mean, even just these protests that we see are a continuation. So what do you see happening moving forward, Scott? Do you have any advice for people or anything else you want to bring to our attention?
Well, the one bit of advice is absolutely don't despair because I'll give you 2 reasons. One is um, a few backwoods colonials were able, who were attached to America's founding principles, managed to knock down the greatest empire the world had ever seen, right? Now you may say, oh, but that was 2.5 centuries ago. Well, what we were just talking about is more evidence you shouldn't despair. Uh, despair comes from feeling powerless. And I get it when you read about all that censorship stuff or the billions of dollars running through the Arabella network every election cycle. I mean, yeah, it's easy to be depressed by that, but uh, you shouldn't feel powerless because if you truly were powerless, the left would not be obsessed with silencing you, canceling you, censoring you. They need to censor you because you are powerful, and you should never forget that. And you should organize yourself, right? You've organized an audience for yourself with this podcast. That's excellent. You are bringing people together. You're spreading truths. Uh, you're helping each other. That's the real answer is out organize the left, and it shouldn't be hard because you have a lot more potential folks to organize than they do.
Yeah, and they have some terrible ideas, no doubt. Well, Scott, I really appreciate you speaking with me today. I want to make sure that viewers know they can follow the Capital Research Center on X. Where are the best ways for people to follow you and to find your work and purchase the book?
Sure. Well, the book's available anywhere books are sold. Uh, At our main site, capitalresearch.org, you can sign up for a twice a month newsletter, electronic newsletter. And I promise it's not a begging letter. It's just the greatest hits of our research for the last 2 weeks. Then the other thing you should do is bookmark influencewatch.org, influencewatch.org. That is our online Wikipedia of the left. Thousands of entries on unions, foundations, mega donors, movements like the Green New Deal, all these activist groups. Everybody I've mentioned this whole time, you can find on Influence Watch. The only warning I'll give you is your first trip there, you're probably going to spend 5 hours going down endless rabbit holes because it's just like Wikipedia. It's all it's all interlinked and the rest. But you want to bookmark that, and when you see some new group and you're skeptical, uh, find out about them on Influence Watch, or if they're brand new and we don't have them, ping us at Influence Watch and say, hey, you guys don't have this new group that's trying to mess up my state of Ohio here or my southern New York here. Let us know and we'll get them on Influence Watch.
Great. Excellent. Well, Scott, thanks again for joining me today. This has been a very informative discussion. I hope people will purchase the book, and I want to remind everybody they can support Crowdsource the Truth by going to crowdsourcethetruth.substack.com or subscribestar.com or patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. You can subscribe there. People can follow me on X at JG_CSTT and subscribe there. Lots of sponsor exclusive content. Scott Walter, thank you so much for joining me and for writing the book about Arabella. I hope we speak again soon.
Thanks so much. Enjoyed it.
Have a great day.